with that, I'll introduce our guest. Emily Snyder has worked at some of the largest fashion brands in New York City, both in the digital world of online shopping and customer behavior, as well as financial planning and inventory management. Most recently, she's worked at calvinklein.com, working on both product selection and overall strategy. She helped to revamp photography and copy strategy to elevate the product and consider the customer first. Prior, she worked at the comfort lingerie brand True & Co. as a key stakeholder in all digital decisions and growth. And there she helped to grow the business during the early stages of the pandemic and again, meet the consumer where they were. True & Co. is uniquely positioned to offer a work-from-home client exactly the underwear they needed in a moment of instability. During this time, she dealt with challenges of shooting and uploading product from home, late inventory deliveries, and unique messaging in marketing during difficult times, all while also being home herself. Earlier in her career, she worked the inventory management at Ann Taylor and Aeropostale, focusing on profitability and maximizing chase opportunities. New to the fashion world, she has worked in wholesale at Ralph Lauren, and she's a graduate of communication and arts from the University of Wisconsin. Emily has an interest in media, film, and all forms of communication. She's also a marathon runner and supporter of the Brooklyn Cat Cafe. Thank you for being here, Emily.
Hello, everybody. Good to meet you all. Well, I just gave a very high-level bird's eye view of your career path up till now, and I wonder if you could share some more detail.
Sure. So, let's start at the beginning. So I went to school for communications. Didn't really know what I wanted to do. So you guys are already more focused than I was. I was like, I don't know. I think I like math. I think I like creative things. My dad's an accountant. My mom's a graphic designer. I was like, I like both those things, but I have no idea where to go with my job. So initially I thought I'd go into the film industry. Moved to New York City. Loved it here. Looked at salaries online, and the film industry paid about $18,000 a year, which, as all of you know, does not even pay half of rent, right? So my parents were like, yeah, we can't like support you, so off you go, try to find something new. So I had a temp job at 9 West for about 2 weeks and really loved it. Loved the industry, loved kind of that creative sense of things, but also kind of the business side as well. So then I started temping at Ralph Lauren, and I really loved it, and that moved into a full-time position, and I was there about 5 years. I worked up my way up from being actually an executive assistant, so like supporting someone, and then moved up, all the way to a junior account executive. At that point, and I'll also just tell you kind of a little bit about my decision-making process, because I feel like that's also important. Like, why did I make the moves I made instead of just being like 1, 2, 3 on the list? So after about 5 years there, you know, it started to feel like I had hit kind of a ceiling in where I was at, and I wasn't really sure that I really loved the wholesale side of the business. And wholesale means I was selling to someone else. It always felt like everything was like pretty combative and trying to kind of like settle between two people, and nobody was on the same page. So I then moved over to Ann Taylor, which is vertically integrated, so design, merch, planning, everybody's all on the same page. You're working towards your own stores, and you kind of like align on a strategy and run with it. So when I went there, it was honestly a breath of fresh air. I kind of was like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. It was a very women-centric company, which I did not feel at Ralph Lauren. So moving on, I definitely felt like just, you know, like inspired by the team and inspired by what they offered. Stayed there about 4 years, worked my way up there. I was mainly in inventory management, not the most exciting job in the world, but definitely very important, and you can make or break your financials of a company with how you distribute your inventory, so great. And then I decided I needed to try something else. I'd been there a while and my boss had left, and things kind of, in business kind of change over. When a big boss leaves, a lot of people move, and you know, the feel of the company kind of changed. So I followed her to her new job at Aeropostale, and kind of then decided to go into merchandise planning, which is kind of where I stayed and pivoted just a little bit. So that's really around putting financial architecture against a product plan. So what the merchants and design team want to do, making sure that it financially makes sense for the company. So I did that for Aeropostale for about 5 years. This is a real fun story. This will probably come up later, but Aeropostale was not in great financial shape and went through a bankruptcy. while I was there. And, talk about things that you never thought you would learn. One of those is how to go through a bankruptcy. So like what happens to a company, what happens to the employees, what happens to things like severance or benefits if the company actually does go bankrupt. Very interesting. Never thought I'd learn it. Never would like to ever again. So at that point I thought, okay, I need to get out of here. I was 8.5 months pregnant and had my child, and then on maternity leave was like, okay, I'm gonna move on to something else. So at this point, you guys all know those companies, right? Ann Taylor, Ralph Lauren, Style, everyone's seen those brands. I wanted to try something a little smaller because there's definitely a difference between working for a gigantic company and working for a very small company. So I moved on to this, what they call direct-to-consumer company called Worth New York. Very high-end. They sold jackets for like $3,000, pants for $300, somewhere in that range. So a lot higher than where I had been before. And the owner was still in the business, who had started the company, alongside now a private equity firm. So as you start to work in the fashion industry, you'll notice that finance has started to kind of step in and take over certain companies, and that definitely was the case at that point in time. So we had this big financial person against this very creative person battling it out. Tricky situation, although I learned a lot. I actually got into fabric planning at that point, outlet planning, learned things that I never would have thought about because it's such a small company. You get a lot more exposure to a lot of other things. That can have an upside and downside for sure. But I learned a lot while I was there, but decided ultimately that I didn't feel a connection necessarily to the brand and felt like I needed to go somewhere else. So at that point I moved to True & Co., which I feel like you guys talked to Betty, yes?
Yeah, we did.
Betty was my designer. Great company. So the ethos of the brand really resonated with me. Women-owned, started in her apartment in San Francisco, couldn't find a bra that would fit her, bought all these brands, had her friends try things on, and was basically the entrepreneur of the fit quiz online, which we've now seen duplicated and replicated in a million different ways. But she was basically the one to say, like, take these 6 questions and then we'll find you a bra that fits. Fascinating company. It was purchased by this bigger company called PVH, which owns many of the brands that you guys are familiar with, Calvin Klein, Tommy Hilfiger, Warner's and Ulta bra brands, as well as True & Co. And at that point in time, they also owned a bunch of dress shirting brands as well. So great big company, loved it, got in there, had a great experience. During the pandemic, which I can talk about in a later question, but during the pandemic, they then decided to wholesale the business, which meant my job was eliminated, and I moved over to CalvinKlein.com. And I know you're all familiar with Calvin Klein, it's one of the biggest brands out there. Again, moving to a much larger team where my job was a little bit more focused, so concentrating on product and strategy. To be honest, not exactly the best cultural fit for me personally. I started to really love being in those smaller teams. You can do more. Your job is a little broader. You have more impact. That can be a good thing and a bad thing, but I liked having that impact. And then, which I can talk about in whatever amount of detail you guys would like, I was laid off. So it was my first experience in getting laid off. Blessing in disguise. It was not a great fit for me. Honestly, it came at the right time. I was laid off at the end of September last year, and I just took a minute to say, what do I want to do? I've been in this industry now 17 years. I've been doing essentially the same thing. What is it that I want out of a job? And it was a great moment in time for me to kind of ruminate on that. And you've caught me right at the beginning. I've been at my new job 5 whole days. I'm now working for a jewelry company called Missouri, which I don't know if any of you know that one. I see some heads nodding. It's very classic style jewelry based out of Toronto. Their motto is buy your own damn diamond. It's meant to be women buying jewelry for themselves, not necessarily men buying it for them, which that again resonated with me, and I've so far in my 5 days of experience really loved it being there in that company.
Great.
Sorry, that was me talking forever. I feel like I've
awesome.
done this on about 1 million interviews at this point, so I can summarize in any level of detail.
That's awesome. Well, I'm wondering if, thinking back to your college days, if there's anything that you feel like you wish you had studied more of while you were in school that would have prepared you better for the path.
And I think, being at FIT, you probably know kind of what your general career path would be. For me, it was very general at that point. It was like just a general broad sense of communication and French as my majors. I would say it would have really helped having a retail math class, just basic understanding of the financials. Even if you're a designer, they're gonna talk to you in numbers at some point in the time. It's good to have an understanding of what that looks like. The second thing I would say is a general marketing class. Digital marketing, especially given what's going on right now, that didn't exist when I was in college, but it would have been really helpful to not have to learn all that on the job, especially around social media. I'm guessing you guys are much more savvy than I am, but there's a whole business aspect to the backside of it that is a little trickier to understand, and that would have been extraordinarily helpful.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you feel like is there any choices that you made along the way that you kind of wish you'd done differently?
Oh, that's always such a good question. I mean, I'm someone who doesn't really look backwards. I'm always like, well, I did what I did, I learned what I learned. I would say, I wish potentially that I had thought through kind of my early career decisions. I actually spent some time in travel. I was a travel agent for a hot second, and that was not aligned to what, it just was like, wow, this is a dying industry, I'm never gonna make any money. I think just kind of being able to explore that maybe a little earlier on and have gotten a head start. There are some of my friends who joined the industry, I say 2 years before me, and are just that much farther ahead from where they want to be, and I would say that's always felt a little weird. Not to say that it's the wrong thing, but just that, I kind of felt like I was always on a back foot a bit.
Oh, yeah. Makes sense. Seems like you did the best with that. So you worked in a lot of different categories, from ready-to-wear to lingerie to now jewelry. Are there any nuances between them that you feel like you can share?
Sure. So I would say the more fashion forward, the more risky it is. So the second you get something like a Zara or even an Ann Taylor or even an Aeropostale, your assortment is as good as your assortment is that month. Your financials are tied to how is my March assortment? You could be make or break based on March. Whereas with Calvin Klein, the basis of their assortment is really underwear and jeans. That's a commodity business, which means that kind of holds steady a lot longer. It gives you a little bit more room to play in the fashion sense, but working for a company that has a little bit of commodity is safer. Not to say that it's the right thing for you to do in your career, it just does give you a bigger sense of security.
Yeah. Well, have you had a favorite place to work with?
Yeah, I would say True & Co. was it for me. I mean, I loved, the founder was, let's call her a little crazy, I would say, to her face. So yeah, she was just one of those people, she was a tech person that started a lingerie brand. So she had none of this experience whatsoever. But just kind of having that community around kind of a shared brand ethos and then a design impact that came out of that, and trying to service a customer that potentially was a little bit ignored in the industry, that felt really good. That felt like a good place to be, for sure.
Yeah, that's so fun. And I think you're the only person I've had this whole semester that came through the sales side of it.
Yes.
Other than myself. So I wonder if you could explain a little bit more about what an account executive does and how the sales role fits in with the whole.
Sure. So account executives really only exist in wholesale. They don't exist in the vertically retail, because essentially your job is you work at a brand. So let's use Ralph Lauren as an example. My job was to present the Ralph Lauren line to the buyers from the wholesale markets. So my role at that time was Macy's Northwest and Macy's Florida, which doesn't exist anymore. Now they just have one Macy's buying team. But I would present to the Macy's team the entire line. And at some companies, they allow you as an account executive to sell into different things. For instance, my Florida customer really needs a lot of dresses, a lot of shorts, a lot of this, a lot of that. Okay, let's distort our assortment to fit your stores better. At Ralph Lauren, they never really let you do that. They only let you basically do one or two things. So it was really, here's your assortment, either sign up for it or don't, and then it becomes a conversation of levels. How much of this do you want? How many stores do you need to fill? That type of thing.
Yeah. I feel like I've learned that it depends on where you are, what the sales role really looks like.
Yeah.
Because when you are at someone that has an extremely strong brand sense, it's a lot more like, here's what we're doing, you better take it.
Yes.
And accounts usually are like, okay, yeah, I'll take it because they want your brand. But when you work at more of a
startup or less known brand, private label, then you kind of do whatever you want with the buying team. And the buying team,
what do you want?
Yeah.
Take it.
Yeah, we'll give you whatever. Please just buy our stuff. And I think that's the upside and downside for working for a big brand that's really well known. if you do that, it's easy because everyone wants what you're selling. If you're working for an upstart, you kind of have to do your job to sell it to the buyers, and that can be tricky.
Yeah, for sure. Another thing, we talked about retail math a couple weeks ago. On the sales side of things, I would say you need to know that just as well as a buyer
Yep.
would need to know it. It's basically the same job as a buyer, it's just
The opposite.
the opposite direction. So
Yeah, exactly.
you care about the receipts they take in, they care about the sales they give to the customer, but at the end of the day, the sales to the customer drive the receipts, so it's all kind of interrelated.
Yep.
So, thank you. How different is an e-commerce merchandiser than brick and mortar? And,
Sure.
are those teams still separate?
Yes.
I know there's been a lot of conversations.
Yeah, so I would say that is an ever-changing question, for sure. So, there's kind of two sides to being a merchant as well. There's kind of the financial side and then the visual side. So those also exist in brick and mortar and online. So online, a visual merchant might be the person that arranges things on the PLP, so the product landing page, or the PDP, the product description page. So the merchandiser is arranging things in those collections to make it look the most saleable to the customer. That's changing a little bit because AI is coming into the mix and doing it better than human beings can do it. Not to say that it's prettiest, but they're doing it in a financial. What is that? That sounds like kind of like a fire alarm.
Yeah, it's
but-
sort of
No,
scary.
you'll hear our fire alarm.
This is not fire alarm? Okay.
Yeah.
But that was interesting.
Yeah.
Fun.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. So visual is visual on the page, AI is taking it over. If you're an e-commerce merchant buying for an e-commerce website, you are more interested in certain things over a brick and mortar merchant. So for instance, I'm sure most of you buy online. Do you buy shoes online? Probably not as much, or if you do, it's something you already know or have tried on, right? Because the sizing there is really tricky. So, or you're buying from Zappos, who has free returns, and you're like me, who buys 10 pairs for my children and returns 9 of them, sometimes 10 of them. So, an e-commerce merchant kind of has to have the lens of what's easy to shop for online and what's harder to shop for online. Basics are a lot easier, reorders are a lot easier. It's also easier to see things in color. Black does not sell as well online as it does in other, so if you've got a black t-shirt or white t-shirt, white sells better online generally than black, depending on the brand. So you're looking at slightly different things. But you have to kind of know your customer and how they're shopping and how that kind of translates online. It can be a little bit different. In brick and mortar, you're usually trying to fill a space. So I have these many fixtures in my store. I have a front fixture that's going to fit 15 styles. I have to fill that fixture. You don't have those constraints online, but you may have other constraints around photography, money, like how much money do you have to spend, etc. So there can be some differences there. I would say in the industry right now, if you work for a very small company, you could be one merchant doing both of those jobs, doing kind of like a financial and a product. You could be also doing some retail, that's kind of being called an omni merchant. If it's a larger company, that might be split between 4 people or more, depending on your categories. For Ralph Lauren, we're talking, or not Ralph Lauren, for Calvin Klein, we're talking probably a team of about 12 people that do what I just described. And then if you add in the stores merchants, there's many more, it's probably 35. So it just depends on the size of the business, but you just have to kind of think about it through one lens or the other. I will say, having omni experience right now is the key, because even the pure play like .coms are going into stores. So even the Majuri, who I just work for now, they're going into stores. They started e-com and now they're going into stores. So having both of those experiences is kind of key throughout your career.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Tell us about this new role, what you're
Yeah,
bringing to them.
so I took a little foray into product, as we mentioned, so I was more on the buying side when I ended at Calvin Klein, and now I'm going back to planning. I'm starting the whole function from scratch. They don't have that there. They were more of like a demand planning function, which is essentially like, if you think about Walmart, right? They have these huge programs that fill in, I bought Starbursts, fill into the Starbursts.
Mm-hmm.
That's demand planning. It's widgets. You could put anything in that spreadsheet, just fill into demand. Don't talk about any kind of stylistic anything having to do with anything. That's how they were planning. Now we're going to move to merchandise planning, which is a much more dynamic and fashion-centric version of planning. Understanding that if I have this this might collaborate with this and eke some sales out of it, or this might be additive and I might have two things. This might be 1 + 1 = 2. Usually it's 1 + 1 = 1.8, just given how, math works. Whatever. Retail math. But yeah, I would say that's kind of where I'm headed. So starting up a whole division of a company, which I've not quite done before, so it's a new experience.
That's fun.
Yeah, a lot of work.
Yeah.
A lot of work. Yeah.
How many people are in the total company?
I think it's about 500 total, but most people sit in Toronto. So
Okay.
there's only a team of about, I want to say 30 people here in New York.
Oh wow. It's bigger than I would have thought.
Yeah, they're open. They have stores all over the world, which I didn't know. They have them in England and in Australia and I think Dubai, and then they're expanding. They're opening a new flagship here in Flatiron shortly.
Nice.
It's going to become their flagship, like their biggest one. They do ear piercing in the store. That was something I didn't know until last week.
Yeah.
Do you guys want to know the funnest thing about jewelry that I learned? This
What?
is the best thing. So, I'm used to being a merchandise planner, marking down inventory. Your Yankees hat's not selling, let's mark it down, get out of it. In jewelry, they just melt it down. Isn't that cool? I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. Like, you don't have to mark down your inventory, you're just like, oh, I'll just go melt it, and they get 80 cents on the dollar.
Oh,
That's
wow.
why you never see marked down inventory in jewelry. They just
Interesting.
melt it.
Interesting. Wow.
Fascinating, right?
Yeah. Can't get sale, Mercury.
No sale.
Oh gosh. Let's see, where was I? So at calvinklein.com, what was your role like there?
Yeah, sure.
More buying.
More buying. So I had the buying team underneath me, and then a visual merchandiser as well, visual e-com merchandiser. So someone who arranged things on the page, as I was saying. So it was really truly buying off of the global Calvin Klein assortment. Calvin is an enormous brand. They have design teams that sit in New York, Amsterdam, and Japan, or Hong Kong. And so the line gets to be enormous. And my job with my team was to select the things that would sell on CK.com. So that isn't everything, as I just mentioned. There's some certain things that sell better. E-com underwear for Calvin was very big. It's 50% of our online business because, as I mentioned, it's easier to buy a bra you already know about online than it is to try on a new shoe or try on a brand new crazy silhouetted dress and take a risk on it. It's a lot easier to just buy a commodity over and over again.
Yeah. Cool. What does an entry-level job look like on that team?
Sure. So it would be an associate or assistant buyer, depending on where you're at in your career. If you're brand new, it's probably an associate. Sometimes they use those words interchangeably at different companies, so it's good to find out. Sometimes it's also called a merch analyst. It's essentially, usually what you end up doing is a lot of PO setup, a lot of item level setup, and you start to once you've got systems down, you start to do forays into analysis. How did things work last week? What do I think I like about it? What do I not? What's my perspective on the assortment? And then you move more into building an assortment from the ground up. Generally speaking, you have a boss over you who's helping you along, but as you move in your career and move up within that position, by the time you're done with that position and ready to move on, you'd be ready to own a small category on your own.
Great, thank you. How, in all of your roles, I guess,
Yeah.
How have you worked with designers through the years?
Yeah.
So most of the people in the room are intending to be designers or
Yeah.
have their own company or more on the side of things.
Yeah, so my role as a financial person, it usually overlapped at the beginning and end of the season. So at the end of the prior season, it would be my job to present to design the financial impact of what happened. So we had collection A, B, and C. A was amazing. These are the things in the collection that work the best margin here. We see these trends coming out of A, B, and C. This is what we think would be great for next year. Then at the beginning of the season, which might be at the same time or not, it would be around setting expectation. Design would come to us and say, here's what we're thinking. Here's a general framework of an assortment. What are your thoughts? And from a financial perspective, we'd say, are you hitting margin targets? That's number one. Can you make money on this assortment? I think it's rare, it's a very rare thing to not look at the financials of what's going on with your assortment, especially at a large company, because at the end of the day, it's all to make money, so you have to understand that retail math part of it first. After that, it's a lot of download conversation back and forth. So my role at Calvin Klein, a lot of the times we'd go to design to get more details for the product detail page. Why did you design this way? What trends are you seeing? What's the inspiration for this, because as we've seen brands grow online and continue to grow, what stands out are those brands who can really tell you a story that you can connect to. So getting that information all the way through to the PDP is really important.
PDP is product
detail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you ever had a time in your career where you failed at something really badly?
Yeah, oh yeah. Okay, so here's what I want to tell you about a little story about Aeropostale. So it wasn't necessarily that I failed, I would say that the company failed. So we had a CEO who was very ambitious and bullish, which I appreciate, made some decisions that I would say probably weren't as forward thinking as he needed to be. Got us into some financial trouble. And at that point, I'm in the financial sector, so I can literally see week by week. That's the thing about being in my role. You can usually see week by week what's going on with the financials. And we're starting to hear rumblings about we can't place new receipts, can't buy goods. So design's still designing. We can't place those goods to buy them for future seasons. Start to hear rumble. And essentially what happened was there's a bankruptcy. A hostile takeover by, again, a private equity firm that came in and tried to buy the company. It was auctioned off. Like I said, learned a lot about what would happen. I was 8.5 months pregnant. This was the summer of Pokemon Go. Do you guys remember that summer?
Yeah.
2016. That's right. That's right. And it's August. I am enormous. It is 98 degrees outside, and I'm trying to work, but there's literally nothing I can do because we cannot place any more receipts. And we're just counting down the days until they auction off the company. So what did I do?
Yeah.
I played a lot of Pokemon
Oh my
Go.
God.
I did. I walked and I talked and I was like networking and trying to like make something work, and like this baby is enormous, but like I knew I couldn't leave. And at that point in time, I didn't know if I was going to get maternity leave. If the company folded, this was news to me. Company folded that day, right, on August 27th, I would have no maternity leave for my son who was born the next month. That was a little bit scary to have no financial net and no place to turn to, right? So I think my biggest learning out of that was work your network all the time. When you're getting to your first job, meet 1 million people and keep in contact with them forever. That's how I actually know Caroline, is through our network, because that's what keeps us all afloat in this world, and it's a very small industry. Don't burn bridges. Don't go out in a blaze of glory because you hate the company. You will see those people again. I 100% tell you that will happen. So I think my biggest learning there was just, keep your friends close to you and keep working that network as it's going down, and also keep your ears open to the financials of the company. Even if you're in design, if you start to hear things like financial trouble, just get yourself, find yourself a planner. A planner will tell you what's happening, what's up, and just understand what's happening, because it has happened to me more than once, and it will happen to you too, where there's financial, if you hear that we're not paying bills, we're not making payroll, those things are kind of triggers to just open up your ears.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you don't get caught.
You don't get caught with feeling like, oh my gosh, I got laid off and I have no resume, I have no LinkedIn, I have no start on anything. You want to at least know what's coming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I like that advice. How about one of your greatest successes?
Yeah. So I would say product-wise, at True & Co, I'm not sure if Betty mentioned this, but we came up with this bra called the Triangle Convertible Strap. True & Co made these very beautiful but very basic bras with thick straps that are super comfortable, feels like a hug, the fabric is amazing, it's great for pandemic life and now just normal mom life or whatever, but they have very thick straps. We heard through the grapevine, through their customers, through everyone, we love your bra, but can you make the straps thinner? I can't wear it with a tank top in the summer. So we take that to design, and Betty and her team go off and they design us a skinny strap convertible with a triangle front. We place as many units as we can. It was 2,000 units, sell through them in 3 days. Get it on the site, sell through in 3 days. Clearly it's a hit, right? And even everyone in the office is like, that's a good looking bra. And if you start to hear everyone in the office say, that's a good looking bra, that's probably something to bet on, right? That's a good indication of generally the general consensus. And I don't just mean other designers. I mean other people who are in finance and places where they don't have the design eye. If they're starting to say to you, ooh, I really like that, that's probably a good idea. So that bra, we then reorder. We keep trying to get more and more inventory. It was $900,000 bra in its first year.
Wow.
The second year, it made $1.7 million. And and then it reiterated on for Calvin Klein. It is now the Calvin Klein Invisibles bra, if any of you have seen that. It is now something like, I think every year it's like $8 million.
Wow.
Based on one tiny little suggestion from a customer.
Wow, that's pretty cool. And it shows how powerful a customer can be.
Yeah.
Sending you a recommendation. I think it is so funny though, because oftentimes when you're working in a fashion office, there will come a point in time where there's like a bunch of samples that they want to sell off. And a recent company I was working at, it was like, okay, go take whatever you want, pay $5
Yeah,
a garment.
$5
And these are like, $200 dresses, whatever. The dogs
Are still the
are
dogs.
still the dogs, even when it's $5. Like the worst selling styles you cannot give away, even to people in the company who like obsess over your brand and love your brand. So
That's very
it's
true.
a really good idea, a good point to just kind of survey the office.
Yeah.
See what people think about things,
Yeah.
because usually it proves true.
Usually, yeah, and I love design. You guys have great ideas, don't get me wrong. Sometimes your ideas go off the deep end a little bit, and I say that affectionately, but they aren't necessarily the most commercial. So sometimes it's good to get like people who don't design with you all day. Just poll and see, what do they like? What are they interested in? And I will guarantee you, I'm from the Midwest. The Midwest is 10 years behind New York City. They are not into bigger, wide like jeans yet. They're still in the skinny jeans because those just came like 2 years ago. So we're getting there. So just keep that in mind as you're like laughing. It's so true though. It's so true. But just keep in mind that like you are living in like the center of the fashion world, and other people might not quite be there with you.
Yeah. That's good advice. Are there any important e-commerce insights that are important right now that you can share with us?
So the biggest one is AI. That is starting to become, you know what that means, like artificial intelligence. So it's starting to become part of the process of building a website. So I did some research for a company while I was laid off that does search function AI. And this goes right alongside personalization. So if you're starting to see emails, certain companies have it and certain companies do. You get an email that says, "Hi Emily, we know you shopped us for this. These things might be things you might like." That's personalization. AI takes it another step forward and says, next time I show up on your website, I'm going to show you the things that we think you're going to like. The things that you've clicked on, the things that you like match up to things. That's really key. Like that's where e-commerce is going, that personalization plus that kind of artificial intelligence to make it happen. No, that's okay. Am I okay on time?
No, yeah, it's not my phone's buzzing. How do you feel like the chat, AI chat GPT, is that what you're talking about? Or
it's more, yeah, I mean, that's definitely, I don't even know where that's going, to be honest. That's going down a different path altogether. I think what I'm talking about is kind of like using algorithms in the background of websites to help them run more efficiently and give you better recommendations. That has to do with both the visual merchandising, so how things show up on the page. If you've ever gone to a website and you're like, this is a really weird order, like this doesn't make any sense. Why is this way and this doesn't like look right to me? That could be because it's all algorithm based. It could be that it's inventory based. They put the stuff that they have the most of at the top. If you scroll, it might be that they're out of sizes on the bottom or out of stock. That's algorithms at play. Where it comes further is when it's about what you click on and your cookies and what I click on my cookies. Our sites will look different. That's really where that differentiation is coming.
Makes sense. And do you feel like this is a little bit of job eating? Like it will eat up that visual merchandiser role?
Yeah, it may. I think there's still a place for an editorial comment. You know, like I think if you go to a website, like I shop Bowden for my kids all the time, it's a British brand. They always have these beautiful editorial pages which just like make you fall in love with the brand. Ralph Lauren's really good at it too. Like people galloping through the snow with their beautiful sweaters and their dogs and their Rolls Royces and whatever. You're like, I love that brand, right? Those pages never get any clicks ever. I must be the only person who's clicking on them, but that there's still a place for that. Editorial comment, branding, that kind of like commentary on that. As far as like who's arranging things on the page, that might morph into something else. Somebody still has to load all those pictures on the pages, all the copy, that also has to get done. So that's still a job.
Yeah.
It just depends on, where that goes. It might turn more into a technology job, to be honest, like more on the tech side, the IT side, than the fashion side.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
In your career so far, how much emphasis has been put onto sustainability? Is this a topic that
I'd say PVH, for all of the lovely and horrible things that they are, because they're such a large company, there's both, they were ahead of the game on sustainability. They started talking about this 6 years ago when I started, and I was like, wow, this is the first time I've heard it. And they started doing things like minimizing packaging, using recycled fibers. That was the first I'd ever heard of it, and now it's kind of standard. And then there's the whole like thread up version with Madewell. Bring in a pair of jeans, they resell them, you get 20% off. Those things are starting to become more mainstream. I think because, and I'm going to make some grand general assumptions, your generation is saying you have to have this as part of the brand or I'm not going to shop it. I think that's definitely coming through, and if you're not talking about it, you're kind of behind the times. I would say there's still a long way to go. There's still a lot of packaging that doesn't need to be there. I myself am just flabbergasted at the amount of plastic that's still being used. On each's, what we call each's, which is like a single unit at a distribution center, everything is still wrapped in plastic. Does it need to be? Is there a different way? Is there a plastic that's biodegradable? Is there some other version of it? But I think we're still stuck in that era of this is what's always worked and we're still there.
Yeah, scary. We certainly talk about it a lot here, but hoping that it's getting out into the industry more and more, and especially as these classes graduate.
Yes.
Out there. We had Sal McCartney here last week actually.
Well, just lucky.
And I saw a lot of you in the room. We didn't talk about it, but I saw at least you two.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was awesome. She was amazing. Not in this class.
Yeah.
That would be really
Bigger audience, I'm assuming.
But
so
yeah,
she didn't have like
auditorium.
what all of my you didn't. Just kidding. I totally.
She was
She's great.
she was awesome. You're awesome too. But that was cool. It was really cool to hear her.
That's awesome.
Sustainability take.
Yeah, I also think Europe's a little ahead of us on this. When we have to do at PVH these sustainability studies. You have to prove how much percentage of your stuff is sustainable. Like, then the benchmarks keep changing. Initially, it was like 20% of your fiber had to be recycled for you to call it recycled. But to me, that's not recycled. That's like a dollop in the big vat of fabric. Now it's moving, so it has to be the majority. But then it gets tricky, right? Because there's a main fabric, there's buttons, there's thread, there's elastic. Like, which components are you talking about? So they have those benchmarks keep changing, but I think we're headed more towards like an 80%. Europe is a little different, and their standards are a little different. And I think if we sell in both places, it's going to be interesting to see who kind of wins that out. For us, California usually dictates, like whatever California says the whole country kind of has to do. But I think Europe, they were a little ahead of us on that one.
Yeah. Makes no sense. Yeah, there's some good countries there over there pushing.
Yeah.
Pushing the way. You touched a little bit about it, or at least in your bio, about life during the pandemic.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I'm sure it was hard for you guys. Like, I can't imagine. Horrible, right? The world shuts down, and suddenly you have no friends. You're on a computer 18 hours a day, and you feel like you're losing your mind. It was the same for me. I was at Chirico at that point in time. I had two very small children, a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old at that point, and a very active 3-year-old, which was difficult and no daycare. My husband is a journalist, so his job got very interesting. He reports on educational news. So pandemic happens, world shuts down. What does everyone want to hear about? The kids in school. His job takes off, my job. We're making comfort lingerie for people who are home. My job takes off when we have 2 kids home. I say that's where all of my gray hair came from, those 2 years when we were just kind of like winging it until everybody could get their stuff back together. It was difficult. It was also difficult to just work from home and try to shoot product from home. We couldn't go into the studio. We couldn't move samples around. You're trying to do buys with people holding up something to a camera on Zoom and trying to be like, okay, I think I need 1,000 of those. You're like, you have no idea. It's very difficult. But it does make you think differently. We got a lot faster at shooting product because we didn't have a studio, and we just asked people, like freelancers, to shoot from their house. So things got faster because we had to. We learned a lot from that for sure.
Yeah. Did anything stay the same after?
I would say the industry on the whole, there's still more working from home. I wouldn't say that some companies are back 5 days a week, don't get me wrong, but there's still an acceptance that 1 to 2 to 3 days a week is pretty standard. I would also say the second thing I genuinely appreciate is that we now talk about mental health a little bit more, even as a company. It was a struggle, I think, for a lot of employees to be home, and just to have that conversation with your manager, I'm struggling mentally to be home. I don't think any of us did that before the pandemic, or if we did, it was like a one-off, maybe special occasion. And I was like, no, I really, I need to go outside. Like, I need to, see something that's not my computer. And I think that has opened up a dialogue where people are just more receptive to that kind of conversation.
I would totally agree with that.
Yeah.
I also think it took down kind of the screens. there was so much blending between home life and work life. You saw people's children, you saw people's dogs, you
Yes.
accidentally saw their wife changing in the
Yes.
background or
Yes.
whatever.
Yes.
I actually definitely did do that once. I don't know how many people were on my husband's call, but it did happen. So I feel like it just kind of makes things a little bit more.
Yeah, and my favorite story is that I had 2 coworkers, and they're a couple, and they would be working on Zooms in the same room, and then not like realize that they were like on the same Zoom or something. So then you've got like the echo, and you're trying to figure it out, but you're in a studio, like no room to move. Yeah.
Can you tell us about the best boss you've ever had?
Yes, her name was Kim Simon. She's amazing. She now works at Ross. The reason why she was the best boss in the entire world, she was the most compassionate, kind person I'd ever worked for. When I was done at Ralph Lauren is a very intense environment. It is not anymore, from what I understand. It's a lot more realistic, nicer. When I was there, they yelled a lot. I had a little PTSD at my end of my time there, to be honest. And I literally walked into Aunt Taylor and was like, oh my God, like, are you gonna yell at me? And it was just such a warm, loving environment. I think it took me a little while to like
That's
understand.
funny. I did the opposite, by the way. I went to Ralph Lauren.
How did you do
I
that?
don't know. We didn't talk about that ever.
It always depends who your boss is, right? You
Yeah.
work for your boss. That's another thing my husband and I always talk about. You work for your boss. You don't necessarily work for the company. So if you find a good boss, awesome. And when you're in the interview process, because chances are you're not all going to start your own lines, just pay attention to how that person treats you. Pay attention to the questions they ask. Ask about their management style. That person is the controller of your day. So if it's a good person, like Kim was, who was very supportive of everything, and the best part about her was she would come to me with a problem, and she'd say, I have a problem. I'd say, okay. And she'd say, I want X, Y, and Z. I'd say, okay. And she's like, can you figure it out? And I'd say, okay, I'll get back to you. And then she'd let me do my job, and let me think about it, and let me iterate on things, and then come back to her with the solution, which was awesome. It wasn't someone like dictating to me, do these 3 things and then I'll check. I don't know about you, but who likes to work like that? Like that's like the most horrible experience in the world. So having someone give you that freedom to like breathe and like think and be innovative and try and do that, that was why I loved working for her, and why I would work for her in a heartbeat if she didn't work at Ross, who has no eCommerce.
Ross
That's the
is
only thing.
extremely hard place to work too. I feel like it's all negotiating.
Yes, and they do not like
Intense.
eCommerce at all.
What's Ross?
It's like TJ Maxx.
Oh.
Their closest store I think is in New Jersey.
And I'm not in New York.
Yeah, it's off price.
It's
So
very cheap off price.
it's cheap off price.
Yeah.
Like Big Lots.
Burlington, TJ Maxx.
Oh,
Ross is below.
oh,
They're a big part of the ecosystem though.
And
Yeah.
they make a lot of money, and
Yeah.
you get paid a lot to work there. So if you ever like, should I work there? You have no flexibility, but they pay you a lot. So it's kind of like a give or a take, right? Like what's up with your world right now? Do you just really need money? Then go work at Ross. Have at it, but you're not gonna have any flexibility in your role.
Yeah. People like it.
Yeah, they do.
So the flip side of that is who's the best employee you've ever had and why?
Oh my gosh, you know, the thing is, I just love my team so much. It's hard to say like who. I've had such good teams, and I think people that I like working with are hungry, engaged, excited to be there, have a perspective, come to the table with their own ideas. That is the best thing in the world as a boss. Hey, I was thinking about this thing, what if we did X, Y, and Z? That's the best thing, because then even if you have to say no, at least they're thinking.
Yeah.
At least they're curious, at least they're giving you something that you can work with.
Yeah.
That's the best.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. How has it been? I mean, you touched about working through the pandemic with young children, but what's it like in the industry being a young mother?
Yeah. Oh, I have so much to say on this topic. I could talk to you for like 3 hours on being a working mom in this industry, and just being a working mom in general. But what I would say is, you know, if you reach that point in your life where you're ready to become a parent, you really have to think about the situation you're in. Who's your boss? What's your flexibility? What openness do they have to going to doctor's appointments, to sick children? Those are considerations. I worked at jobs where that was like a big no-no, and like you could not leave, and then what, right? That's not an environment where you're gonna ever feel okay. You're not gonna feel okay as a parent, and you're not gonna feel okay as an employee, because you're always gonna feel like you're failing. I don't know if you've had this experience, but there's certain moments, it doesn't matter even if you're at the best company, there's moments where you feel like you're failing everybody. Because your kids, needed you at a 3 o'clock performance and you have a buy review. Like there's moments where it just feels really, really tough. At the same time, those moments, and I hate the word balance because I don't think it exists. What I think you have to think about it is like riding down a river together. Your job and your kids and your families riding down, and sometimes you have to flex one way and sometimes you have to flex the other way, and you just have to try to make it work. I think the last thing I'll say on that is if you feel like you're not in the best environment to make that work, like your job is not supportive, move before you have the kid, because otherwise you're stuck. There's a very weird thing around trying to find a job pregnant. Let me just be clear, and this really only applies to females or people who are going to carry children. It's very hard to move jobs pregnant. It's very hard to get maternity leave while pregnant, at a brand new job. Usually you have to be there a year or half a year or something along those lines.
I think legally they don't have to pay you unless you've been there a year.
Yeah, and even then, sometimes it's 14 weeks. And if you've been there 5 years, sometimes you get 6 months. That's a huge difference to you and to the kid and all those things. So I would just say consider that before you decide to make that move.
Yeah. It is also really hard to move jobs when you have a really young kid.
It is.
You want a priority shift. You're like, I gotta get home. Like,
Yeah.
I don't care.
And I'm 5 days into this job, and I can tell my boss, who does not have children but is very nice about the children situation, is like, I'm gonna plan this meeting from 4 till 6. I'm like, I have to get my kids every other day-ish at between 5 and 6. That's it. I have to. So now I'm already having to like say I can't make that meeting, and I can't tell you it's like a little bit painful every time, but like you just have to set that precedent that that's what's important.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Honestly, I've always wondered this because like when you're passionate about something, it's like you want to give it your all, but also like family and whatever you consider family is like also such a big priority.
Yeah.
When do you like cut the line where it's like I'm not gonna settle for like my passion and my family? Like where do you like have to realize that like your job isn't everything?
So I will say this, like I said, it's kind of like a river. Like you can't, there's not like a deciding line. It's almost as if it's a day-by-day decision.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I will say with young children, it's a particularly hard point. So there's that whole lean in thing with Sheryl Sandberg. I wanna say that that's BS unless you have really good childcare. Because I don't have parents in the city, and I have friends whose parents take their kids for long weekends and weeks, and they just like make the rounds with the in-laws, and they have all this time to themselves. Fantastic. I don't have that support, so there was no possibility for me to like lean into a job, and I made that decision. I am now at a point with a 6 and a 9-year-old where I can do that again for the first time. So I would say it takes about 5 years of young children where you just have to decide. If you've got a mom, a grandma, a somebody, a grandpa, a uncle, a someone to help you, it's a little different.
Mm-hmm. I think, from my perspective, I was just telling Emily before, and I know I've shared all of you with my career path, but about 5 years ago, I needed to make a choice to step back because my husband's job was too intense and my kids needed me more at home than I could lean on my network for. But I made a very conscious effort that I was not gonna just like step away forever, and I made my network really strong, and as soon as I wanted a job, there was a job there waiting for me. Mm-hmm. And I am enjoying it so much more than I would have if I'd like slogged through the last 5 years just like plugging away.
And I think that's a great choice and a great point also that I'm all for stay-at-home parents. My mom was a stay-at-home parent. She then had to go back to school to like get a job because she'd been out of the workforce for like 10 years, and she went back to be a graphic designer, and then she went on with her world and worked at Oshkosh B'gosh. Do you remember that brand? And did all of that stuff. And I'm so glad that she did all of that. At the same time, had she kept like some part-time freelance something going, I think her network would have stayed, and it wouldn't have been such a hard transition. So I mean, you have to do what's right for you, but I think keeping something going is really the way to go, especially if you're super passionate about your job.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's not a question, is it?
No, I actually do have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So, when you first started, what company really taught you your e-commerce like business skills?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Thank you.
So I was really in stores until I got to True & Co. So, and at that point there were some omni jobs, but not a ton. And honestly, I remember, because I'm gonna date myself real good, ready? So I was at Ralph Lauren in, I wanna say like 2007, and someone was like, we have these new things, they're called QR codes. And it was like the first time anyone had used it. And they're like, we're not sure what we're gonna use them for, but here they are. And David Warren, Ralph Lauren's son, was the head of e-commerce, and he was the one pushing this technology to the forefront. But I didn't really get started in technology until I was at Truco, so it's only been about 5 years. It is, I think it's different for you guys because there's a lot more options with digital jobs right now. When I was younger in my career, they didn't exist, or they were smaller, or they were offshoots. And it wasn't until I would say 10 years ago that there was kind of a switch towards digital. So it was really Truco, to answer your question.
Thank you.
Before I fully turn it over to students for the remainder of their questions, we have some capstone questions that we asked
Yeah, sure.
this semester. And so the first one is, what advice do you have for yourself as a new graduate?
Goodness, don't panic. I think I was like, I don't know what I want to do. And oh my goodness, I'm trying to figure it out, which you guys won't have because you clearly know where you want to go with your lives. But I was a little lost coming out of college, to be honest, and I didn't really quite know. I thought I wanted to go into the film industry, but like I said, $18,000 pays no bills. So I think just being a little patient with yourself about figuring out exactly your path. Like, just be patient. It might take a couple years. You might think, I really want this, and get into it and go, no, that's not what I want. Be patient. It'll come to fruition. Then you'll know what you don't want, and you can move on to something in your next job.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. What's the most important thing you learned on your first job?
How not to be a manager. I would say, I realized that like I needed a more nurturing environment, which is rare in the fashion industry. I didn't like the competitiveness of my first job, that everything was kind of like a battle. I didn't love that environment, and listen, I'm my own person. Some people feed on that, and there's an account executive personality, which I'm sure you know very well, that's very aggressive and very good at what they do. That's not my personality, and I knew after that job, and I knew that that's not how I wanted to be managed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good, and that's how you knew the best manager versus the
Yeah.
worst manager. What do you hate about the fashion industry?
Oh God. This is a good question. I feel like the thing I hate the most is the attitude. There's an attitude that like we're better than, or we're like a snootiness and a nose up in it, and I'm like, we're making clothes. My sister's a physician. She saves lives. Like, all I do is make clothes, and yes, I get it. There's beautiful clothes, there's beautiful inspiration, there's beautiful designs. Don't get me wrong, but sometimes we take ourselves a bit too seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that. What do you feel like is the biggest macro trend that's going to be happening to the industry in the next 5 years?
Yeah, like I said, I think it's personalization and AI. I think that's really gonna make an interesting foray into fashion. What happens when, what we've been lacking on the e-commerce side is lost sales. Do you guys know what that means? So it means like, if you walked into a store for a size 6 shoe and they didn't have a shoe and you walked out, that's not captured in the data anywhere. You can't see that the person walked in and walked out for a size 6. It's not like you register, oh, I would have bought the 6 if it were here, right? With this AI and with this version of personalization, the idea is that it will feed you what you want, and so there will be no lost sales, so that there will be more sales to be done in the things that you want, if that makes sense. I think that's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out, and then to see how do you get trends in there, right? Because if you're telling me what I want, but how do I get a trend that I don't even know that I want? How do you insert that into the algorithm, into the scope of what you're doing?
Thank you.
Sure.
What questions are out there? And does anyone need more snacks?
Yeah, there's more snacks for sure. I'm gonna get some water.
I have 2 questions actually. So I'm actually from Wisconsin as well.
Oh, whereabouts?
I'm from Hudson, so it's right
Mhm.
outside of Minneapolis, but both of my siblings are from Madison.
Nice.
And with that being said, I've always kind of felt like I've had a connection to the Midwest that I
Yeah.
want to go back to. But being in fashion design and the design world, there might be kind of a lacking of that in the Midwest. And so I wanted to hear what you thought of opportunity in other places
Yeah,
in the
sure.
United States and what you thought.
Interestingly enough, there's a lot in Wisconsin. Land's End is there,
Right.
what's the other? Kohl's is there, and then there's a couple of smaller ones, and then there's Crate and Barrel in Chicago. There's a couple of things like in that area. That happens a lot of places, like Ohio, for instance, in Columbus. There's a lot in Columbus that you'd be shocked. Philadelphia, the same thing. The thing is, it's kind of like, what you have to prepare yourself for is, there's 3 or 4 options, not 100. So, if you get to the place that you wanna be, you may be stuck. Like, you might get to a certain level and then get stuck at that company, and you may have 2 other options, or you have to move. Which is not the end of the world. That's how most other industries work. My dad is in healthcare and finance, and he's had to move his career the whole time. Like, they've moved all over the place. But it's just different. You know, in the fashion industry, if you live in New York, there's always somewhere else. Yeah.
Okay, awesome, thank you. And then my other question is, what is your personal strategy or process when you're approaching a new project?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm like a process person, so I like to lay it all out. Like, lay out all the steps first, and kind of see the end and work backwards. Sometimes that's helpful for me too. Like, where do I want to be in 5 years? Or how do I get this product loaded? Or what's the problem I need to solve, and kind of work backwards. I would say also, I love a visual. I think it's great to kind of visually chart out what you want to do. I also love a manifestation of what you want to do. So I'm going to manifest this in my life. I'm going to talk about it over and over and make it happen. I think those are just good ways to kind of think through a process. Creatively, so I'm also a closeted knitter. I love yarn and love to make my own sweaters and do knit patterns, but also kind of do my own thing on the side. And there I'm a lot more roguish and just kind of do it and don't write down what I'm doing and just kind of go off and see what the results are. I tend to not plan those out. They tend to go one way or the other. But yeah.
And then, sorry, one last
No,
thing.
that's okay.
I decided I don't want to ask this one, but I know you had brushed on it a little bit, but with being like having financial knowledge as a designer, what would you say is the best advice or advice you wish you could give to a design team when approaching another project?
Yeah, so number 1 is margin targets. So usually there's some type of a margin target, a cost that you have to hit. It's not pulled out of thin air. There's a reason behind it. So I would just say, pay attention to what that looks like. If there's something in the line that you're just like, this is amazing, we always call those design loves. They usually don't hit margin target, and we usually buy very little of them. And generally speaking, they make the assortment look amazing, but it isn't going to be like the financial part. So I would say just be a good partner there. And so like if you're designing Ralph Lauren black underwear with a different waistband, hit the margin target, because that will then allow you to design some other crazy bra that's beautiful and whatever, because that gives you the room. So just be a little flexible on the stuff that seems super boring, and then you can maybe get the thing that you really want in a line.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
What other questions?
Well, I had a question about like keeping your network alive. I know
Yeah.
a lot of people like say this, but like what are some tips that you usually would say, like especially if you're like looking for a job or like don't have a job and need to keep those connections alive?
Yeah.
And then also similarly, actually I'll let you talk about that.
Okay, sure. So I just did this for essentially 6 months, just worked my network over and over again. I will say organizing a dinner is a really good thing. So I reached out to all of my old Ralph Lauren friends and said, hey, do you guys want to have a dinner? I'd love to chat. And they're like, yes. So I did all of the organizing. I did the legwork, the reservation, the what's the thing called that you doodle the doodle to find the time, all that stuff. And that was helpful to be able to just sit in front of those people that I hadn't seen in years and be like, hey, what's going on with you? And it didn't get me a job, but sometimes I'm like, hey, I'm looking for this, and I get pull someone in from someone else's network. That's actually happening right now. I have a position open underneath me, and I reached out to my network and said, does anyone know anyone? Like, oh yeah, this woman's looking for a job, she might be perfect. I would just say, do that. That goes a long way. I'd also say, LinkedIn goes a long way, keeping up with those connections, and no one squawks at on LinkedIn. No one squawks at, hey, we worked together 5 years ago. I'm looking at a job here. Would you mind X, Y, and Z? No one squawks at that. That's what LinkedIn is for.
Right.
Whether or not that person sees that message, okay, but it's totally fine to reach out to anyone in the network. I have also gotten people reaching out to me who are Madison alumni, like from school, and I'm sure there's a lot of FIT alumni that you can reach out to. That can be hit or miss because you're not really as connected to them, but it can be very helpful to get your foot in the door. There's also something that's brand new, and what is it called? There's like a Slack channel. You have to pay $20 a month. I'm trying to remember what it's called. You pay $20 a month, and it's just all fashion professionals, they put together a whole Slack. You can Slack people, and the whole thing is just to increase your network. For me, I was like, it's $20 a month, I'm not really using it, so I used it for about 5 months and then signed off. But it is an amazing group of people, and you can see where everyone works. So there's a lot of things like, hey, I see this job open, can anyone give me a soft welcome? And they kind of get your foot in the door to HR past other things. That can be extremely helpful. I'll remember what it is eventually, and I can tell Caroline.
Yeah, that's cool.
But yeah, that's what I would say, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's amazing to me how many FIT alumni come to speak in my class and like, I haven't been back here since I graduated, but this university puts on so many great things. I mean, like Stella McCartney last week would have been open to alumni. I mean, obviously they needed to have a bigger space, but things like that are coming up all the time. This class is always open. You can always come to this class and, you know, see who the guests are here and network with people here. But FIT is a huge resource that you should not sleep on. Make sure to keep using it as much as you can.
I also had another question,
sure.
kind of along the same line. But like, when you do like make use of your network, and then like say someone does offer you a job, but then you don't accept it, I feel so bad. And
I know.
It like feels wrong, and I don't want to like close that door. How
Yeah.
do you usually go about it?
Yeah, actually that happened to me. Interesting story. Sharon Green, who was at Ralph Lauren, she moved out to Michael Kors, and I interviewed at Michael Kors at the same time I interviewed at Aeropostale. Got 2 offers on the same day and took the other one. And then she helped me get the job at Trig Co. like 10 years later. So I would just say, you know, keep it as professional and nice as you can, and just say, be honest with them. I have another opportunity. I just turned out another job like, I don't know, 3 weeks ago by saying, you know, I'm so happy and grateful for all of this experience, but this is just not the right fit for me. And you can always use your family, your person, your whatever as your excuse, like this just doesn't feel like the right fit kind of thing.
Yeah. I have tried to hire people who turned me down, and I still think very fondly of them. I can't say I've gone back again to try to hire them because the opportunity hasn't arisen, but I would in a second. So as long as you handle it the way. Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Good question. Other questions out there? Well, let's turn our gears, since we're on the topic, to LinkedIn. Now I teach a course on LinkedIn. Oh, and of course I did not upload the right version of this deck, but it sounds like you just had some great new learnings that you were.
Yeah, sure. I can share my LinkedIn journey. So prior to this job, I had gotten most of my jobs through my network, and friends of friends, or just done it on a more, I don't know, informal basis. When I was looking for this job, I realized there was nothing out there for me, and I needed to really hit the boots running, and also use recruiters, which I've never used before. I had done most of mine as like, look on LinkedIn, look in the job boards, and then just apply, and hope it goes. This time around, I knew I needed to use recruiters. I've moved up enough in my career where there's a certain point where you can't use job boards anymore. So that requires a much more upscale LinkedIn presence and resume. There are now people you can hire to write your resume and your LinkedIn, which I did for the first time. I'm glad I did, because I then look at other people's LinkedIn and I'm like, oh, you haven't paid anyone to update your LinkedIn in this particular format. So I think it's definitely
It's gonna make you log in or not. I was kind of hoping it would. Yeah, let's see.
But I'm happy to pull up my LinkedIn with my same picture, because that's the picture I use for everything.
Let's see. Since I'm not logged in.
Normally
it
you
may-
just like Google her name and click on her LinkedIn.
There
I
we go.
am. Log in.
Thank you. Yeah, sometimes they make.
Ugh.
There we go.
Okay, so here's what I learned from the lady who taught me, who is this woman, actually right here, Deborah Wheatman. She writes LinkedIn
What do
stuff,
you know?
and she's crazy, but she's good. She's like, if you watch her stuff, she's just like the most like engaging, crazy woman in the world. Okay, what she told me is, you have to use this background picture, and it needs to be something related to what you do. So if you're in design, it needs to be somewhat related to what you're working on, patterns, fabric, something, whatever you're designing. And then this part, this is what I actually had her really work on. So this has to be done with those lines like that for search. So if you wanna look at mine and literally copy and paste to yours, but that's what has to be exactly like that for all of like the search keys to come in. And then she wrote this whole thing, like this, and which you heard parts of.
The
which
about,
I still,
yeah.
The about section was basically what you just heard. So she wrote this whole thing. You can read it, and essentially what you have to think about with your LinkedIn is, someone's hiring you to do a job, you have to prove to them that you can do the job. So you're selling yourself to them. So what things do you bring to the table that no one else does? So you guys are all going to be FIT graduates, you're going to have design experience, you'll have a portfolio, things like that. You're going to want to talk about that here. Like, what do you bring to the table? And then what can you do for them? Think about it that way.
Great, and another thing is your profile shot. I think is super important, that it's just you in the picture.
Yes.
You have someone else take it for you.
Yes.
Do not make it a selfie. Nice neutral background for the most part. Try to make it look as professional as you can.
Yeah.
This is not your, this is not your TikTok Instagram shot. This
I
is,
would say don't like put your bikini shot up here, or like, chest hair poking out, whatever's going on. I would make it as professional as possible. My husband picked this shot where I'm not smiling. I had others smiling. He was like, no, you don't pick the smiling one. I'm like, okay.
he's a journalist.
He's a journalist, so fine, whatever. But I would say, yeah, that's definitely key. I would also say when you get like a little bit further down, if you want to scroll activity, you can see all my activity, which is not much.
Which, by the way, the more activity you have here, the more likely you're going to show up in people's feeds.
True.
As referred, the more connections you have, and the more activity you have, the higher the algorithm is going to.
And yeah, if you see posts, like them, comment on them on the feeds, because then you show up higher in your search results, which seems weird to me, but my dad, who's retired, even told me that. It's like, you gotta get on there and search things. Okay. And then down here, this part can be a little bit more abbreviated than what's on your resume. I know that seems counterintuitive, but the points on your resume need to be the most fleshed out for your most recent job, but here you're just kind of giving them a scan through. That makes sense.
Enough that they want to ask you for your resume.
Yep.
Is basically the gist.
Yep. And then all this stuff down here, the more stuff you can put in there, great. I don't have a ton. I'm not certified in a lot of things, but if you can take classes to get certified in Adobe or whatever else, I would put all that in there.
I'll put under skills, I think,
Yeah.
for students specifically. Put under skills what classes, what relevant coursework you have on there, especially if you know you're specifically applying for X job and they want to see that you have those skills. I think Kiana, when she was here, she said that basically to you, that your years of experience here are just as valuable as an entry-level job elsewhere. And the amount of stuff that you've done here is leaps and bounds above competition.
Yeah.
So make sure that you're highlighting it as best as you possibly can.
Yeah, we always look for FIT grads.
Yeah.
Hire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same. I always did too. Before I taught here. If you have language, you should definitely make sure that's on there. Any awards, honors, anything like that. Your resume and your LinkedIn is not a place to be humble. I would say.
Unfortunately.
You want to come across humble in an interview for sure, but this is like bragging about everything you can possibly brag about that you've done in your career. You worked at an H&M and you were promoted to be a key holder. Yep, that's huge. Put that on your resume. Make sure that they're aware of that. It may sound like it's an insignificant thing if you're just talking to your friend on the weekend, but it's kind of a big deal because it shows that people trusted you and you were great enough to get moved up to the next level, and that will happen again. So they want to hire you.
The other thing I think that Deb taught me on here, which I think is important, is language here. So she was saying that you can't, like, let's say your job description is like as a merchant, you buy the line for boys jeans. You don't put on there bought men's or boys jeans line. That's not what you want to say. You want to say something that happened that you did. Increase sales by 50% of boys denim in spring 2022 by doing X, Y, and Z, right? So that's the kind of thing that you want to sell yourself. I would say if you're having trouble, because I think sometimes this is hard to do on your own about yourself, use a partner. Help them, like, talk through what you wanted to say and then have them help you spice it up a little bit. Especially if you have like a writer friend, that's always very helpful too.
Yeah. I just want to see if we touched on all my notes here.
Okay. Did I talk too fast? Sorry if it was.
No.
Yeah.
We typically end early because it's hard to monopolize people's time for this long. Headline headline's important, that's summarizing yourself, making sure that you have a brief summary of your professional experience. I feel like we covered all this. Volunteer work, that's not something we touched on. It's important to put volunteer work on there.
I have a question about the like recommendation section.
Yeah.
I was talking with a friend about it this morning. Like, how do I go about being like, hey,
Write me a recommendation.
write me a recommendation on LinkedIn? Like, how do I professionally ask for that?
Yeah, I think there's a way you can request it, actually, for
Yeah,
places
do
on
you have it
LinkedIn.
on yours?
I think my dad, you guys, my dad like loves to recommend things on here, but I think I maybe took them off because literally it was all my dad.
Yours.
But I think there's a way that you can request. I'm like, they don't care. They can see that you're my dad. I don't think they care that.
Okay, so there's probably something
You can
in
like
it.
You
request.
just easily request it, yeah, on LinkedIn, and I'd say choose like a previous manager.
Yeah.
If you were to get a job, if you're gonna get a job offer, you've made your whole way through the interview rounds, they're gonna ask you for your references. Who are the people you're gonna ask for those references? Just go out to them now and say, hey, would you write me a recommendation? I've never been upset about a previous employee asking me to write a recommendation letter. I'm always happy to do that, and they know the people that, and no one's ever asked me that shouldn't have asked me, basically. So you can kind of sense who it is that likes you and whatever. The professors here are going to be like, why all of a sudden am I getting so many emails from students? But I think Kiana's advice of keeping in touch with all of your professors is really good, sound advice. I mean, I think she's probably not the only person who's found a job that way, because it does make you stand out. So.
Yeah, I think just like be polite and confident and just say no worries if not, like if they're gonna say no, they're gonna say no. That's all they can do. They're not gonna be like, how dare you ask me? You know what I mean? Like just be polite and confident in yourself when you ask. And ask someone who you think, you prove yourself to. Don't ask someone that you've sat in the back of the classroom and they don't even know your name, because like they're gonna be like, okay. They don't know what to write about you. I would do want to have somewhat of a relationship with them. But normally they're very responsive.
Yeah, and actually on LinkedIn it's super easy because I think you can even get away with not writing anything, just like clicking on the button. So, worst case scenario,
That's what I was
do
curious
that.
about was like how to get them like on LinkedIn. Like if I ask somebody like to write on LinkedIn, like are they gonna have to go through like this lengthy process to get there, or like?
No, I'd have to log in probably to see that here.
Do you mean like from
See
your
if I can
own
remember my
account,
password.
like if you send me a request, or like
Yeah, I think
it's a button?
I think it's
That's what she was saying. It's a button.
Cause
So I was
yeah.
gonna like verbally ask people
I'm
like
pretty-
I don't know how they go
yeah,
through
I'm
getting
pretty
it.
I mean, I would probably shoot them a message before you do it, so they have a heads up. Like, hey, like I would really like to
Or
request
then they don't
that.
think you did it on like by accident.
Yeah.
Let's see, I'll send, I'm endorsed by some people, so that's like a really easy thing. You can just like click
You're
your
like
name.
there's so many, yeah.
And then I feel like there was a moment in time where a lot of people were laid off, so they were going around endorsing people so that people would endorse them back.
That's the other thing you can
But
do
that
for
works
other
too.
people.
But yeah, I have a couple of recommendations here. I don't know if I requested these or not. Oh, I gave these. I wrote these. And they were definitely requested. They asked me to write them.
And then it shows up on like
Show
that person's
all
like
10.
profile.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I would say
Ask for a recommendation, you see?
Okay. I didn't even click that button because I'm scared.
And then like, you can ask Emily
Yeah,
to write me a
that's fine.
recommendation. You don't have to really, if you want to, but.
Okay, so ask all this stuff and it's a bit professionally. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I was-
there's
I
a
was
comment,
thinking-
yeah.
I would say that's probably most important at this point in your career, where like you're foraging out, not necessarily with a ton of references. This kind of acts as that. I think a little later, your network's gonna kind of know and your experience will speak more for it, I guess, if that makes sense. So I know it's probably tricky right now, but it's probably.
I know it seems crazy too to go on LinkedIn and connect with all people, like connect with all the people in this class, connect with all the people that you've come across with your FIT, because in 10 years, someone will be somewhere where you may not even want a job there. Like I this week was going through LinkedIn trying to find buyers in London, which is a place I've never sold before. I don't know anyone at Harrods, Liberty, anywhere. If any of you do, please let me know. But I was going and clicking on the buyers I wanted to talk to and seeing who I knew in common, and then reaching out to those people being like, how well do you know this LinkedIn contact? Will you introduce me? And, maybe it will lead to something. Who knows? But these random connections that I have can actually like pay it down the road. So yeah.
Thank you for that.
No problem. So I'm going to challenge all of you to take some time on your LinkedIn this week. Does everyone raise your hand if you have a LinkedIn page?
The school gives us one, so it
Or,
should
like,
just
pushes
be,
you
it
to,
should
yeah.
be like set up.
So if you don't have one, make sure you get one going. Next week, if you have a resume, please bring it. If you have a job you're actively applying for and a cover letter, please bring that too in a hard copy. We might do like a little bit of speed dating where you guys can kind of help each other push your resumes along, and we'll also work with our guests that are coming. So we'll get you ready to really apply for summer. All right, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
This is really helpful.